I'd like to introduce you to Carey Smith Sipp, who will be co-leading this presentation with me. Carey is a solutions journalist and nurturing advocate who has written about the science of adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, for almost 15 years. She has written exclusively for the pacesconnection.com, a social networking advancing the science of PACEs, which stands for Positive and Adverse Childhood Experiences. And she has a wealth of experience and insights on why understanding PACEs are important for Love's work and for each of us individually. So really excited and honored to have Carey join us tonight, and you'll hear from her more in just a moment. Let me add a few more people in. But for now, let's dive into review and celebrate some of the impacts that you helped us create. Your generosity has helped us create and achieve this past year. As you know, at its core, human trafficking is the exploitation of a person's vulnerabilities. So love exists to prevent the trafficking and oppression of vulnerable children and women and empower them to be change makers in their communities. With your support and the strength of our indigenously led anti-trafficking network, we address the root causes of exploitation in remote communities where children and women are the most vulnerable. And there are not many organizations working there because it's either too dangerous, too remote, or too expensive to deliver critical services. We do this by providing protection, education, and economic development. And the effectiveness of our work in really hard to reach places and often lawless lands is shaped through our focus on building partnerships with Indigenous directors and their local staff. So we're working together to create long-lasting solutions that affect those who are vulnerable in their communities. This means that we support and equip Indigenous leaders who utilize their experience and expertise and resources to care for the vulnerable that they're very intimately familiar with. They're from they're from where they live, so they know how to navigate the communities, the towns, the villages, and the country that they're situated in. Working in war zones creates really unique challenges for our local partners to navigate. And as you know, the conflict in Sudan erupted in April of 2023. And what many, unfortunately, are calling the forgotten war, Sudan's tragedy remains mostly and sadly overlooked. Over 1 year later, now we're passing the 1 year mile mark, 10 million Sudanese have been forced to flee their homes or have left Sudan altogether. Nearly 20 million children can no longer attend school, and this has led to an increased recruitment of child soldiers, as well as other exploitative practices that are affecting the vulnerable there. Our partners at all locations, and Ashton, if you'll advance to the next slide with the map, all of the locations where we're working at our locally led level are feeling the effects of war, even if they are not currently in the direct line of fire. For example, in Sudan, the topmost heart is where our partners are at Our Father's Cleft, and they're in the Nuba Mountains. This is a really affected and conflict-ridden region that has been oppressed for many, many years. And they are resource restricted. For 6 months out of the year, they can't access them by road. It's a no-fly zone, so getting resources in and out is always very complicated. But with the increase of war in Sudan, at the last count, there were close to 476,000 people that have resettled in the Nuba Mountains. Few with means for housing, or access for food. So there's massive food insecurity or access to medical attention. And in an already fragile community, the demands for services are being exacerbated. creating huge inflation spikes and limited access to resources. So the people there are really suffering. And at a time when violence defines the futures of many people in Sudan and South Sudan, our commitment all last year, all this, the time of our existence, but especially last year, our commitment to transforming lives during conflict remains steadfast. Ultimately, we believe and hope you will witness tonight, and as you read the impact report, that redemption and transformation are possible even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. So in 2023, our partners, including you, helped us achieve tremendous, really beautiful strides in our work to disrupt the pipeline to trafficking, to bind up the brokenhearted and restore hope. Rescuing and preventing trafficking of 148 new children through our 3 centers, including some of the boys and girls featured in these photos from last year at New Life Ministry. With these new recruits, we also in total provided safe housing for approximately 565 children who had no other option for housing, and educated a total of 1,374 in 3 of our pre-K to 12th grade schools. So a critical component of our model is focused on education, because in South Sudan, in a normal year, and I say that because in Sudan, there's been so much displacement and disruption to the education system, but in South Sudan, over 70% of school-age kids don't have access to education, and only 27% of the adult population can read and write. So our education program, which accounts for about 36% of our program expenses, but the majority of our work, students are equipped to grow intellectually and spiritually in our schools. And this includes children in our protection programs and students from the community who have a place to live. About 809 of them have a place to live, but come for free education programs. They receive 2 meals a day and access to preventative or emergency medical services. Let me share a story of a girl that I'll call Bakita, who was rescued in 2023. Bakita was 12 years old when she was brought to our anti-trafficking network last year. But at the age of 9, at the same time the pandemic was still locking down much of the world, she had started developing eye infections, which ultimately caused her limited vision. Out of fear or ignorance, and maybe even some of the pandemic mania that was going on, her entire family chased her out of their home because they feared that she was cursed and would curse them. This is not an uncommon story. Maybe some of the elements change for the kids that come to our centers that need really critical emergency support. But it's more common than we would wish. Bakita was struggling to survive at 9 years old on the streets in a nearby town for nearly a year, all by herself. Thankfully, a kind government official was visiting the town, and was determined to help Bakita. And he brought her to Juba, which is the capital of South Sudan, for treatment, and he housed her with his family. However, when her eyesight did not improve, he asked Love's local leaders to help, and in 2023, she was medically evacuated to Kenya for support and fully recovered. Since her home life is not a safe option, she now calls Love's anti-trafficking network her home, and she is thriving in our care and school for the first time. So she entered school at age 13 for the first time when she joined us. So often the children in our program simply have nowhere to go for help, and simple medical procedures are large barriers that prevent them from thriving, maybe even surviving. Last year, we provided medical evacuations for 7 students to Kenya, and represented here is members from the Independent Presbyterian Church who helped offer an emergency grant to support some of those kids. So thank you very much for that. They were followed up in Kenya by recovery at our in-country safe house, and then they reintegrated back to their countries of origin, which was both Sudan and South Sudan. In 2024, we already have 2 children who are in Kenya for medical emergencies. So this is an ongoing need because there just isn't quality care locally available. One includes a boy named Dang, who was diagnosed with rheumatic heart disease, and he's receiving heart valve replacement surgery. So please keep Dang in your prayer. He should be undergoing surgery in the next couple weeks. Ensuring safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments for all children is really critical to our work at Love, and a very integral part of how you help us prevent human trafficking. In 2023, we were able to provide scholarships for 15 alumni who had gone through our high school program, and 12 of those were nursing students that participated in a medical clinic that served their community. 2 of the photos down below are from that team. They worked side by side with visiting doctors from the USA and collectively treated 1,139 people from the community in 5 days, which is a lot. It was a lot of work, but they did a wonderful job, and working collaboratively, being translators and helping learn from the visitors and to improve their skills was really wonderful. Last year, the last photo, 2 of these nursing students graduated with degrees and are now serving their communities full time. We are not able to send every student to university. However, we believe it is really imperative for us to support and prepare students and the surrounding communities through economic empowerment initiatives and mentorship programs so that they have livelihoods and community support groups once they transition from our programs. We don't age students out. They just have the opportunity to go through our preschool all the way to 12th grade. So no matter what age they graduate, they're welcome to stay in our school program. Next slide, please. We prioritize economic development because it's a really critical, maybe not often mentioned aspect of prevention of trafficking. Stronger families, stronger communities lead to stronger benefits for the prevention of trafficking. We know that communities are transformed through grassroots economic development, which provides a catalyst to transition from dependency towards self-sufficiency and stability. So last year, we had the privilege of equipping 105 male and 66 female full-time staff for our partner locations, serving as teachers, administrators, medical staff, cooks, cleaners, etc. We invested in 13 male and 6 female interns who were alumni of our school programs, and it's a paid internship program. And we created short-term or seasonal jobs for 341 community members who helped construct latrines, tailor uniforms for our students, rethatch a church roof at New Life Ministry, which is one of the pictures, erect fencing to secure farming, or worked at expanding 3 school farms. What's really delightful is that almost 40%, and that's growing, of the leaders serving as full-time staff in our network are women who lead as teachers and administrators and child welfare coordinators, cooks, cleaners, and caretakers of the most vulnerable. Some of these women are survivors of trafficking, and these employment opportunities have equipped them to support their families and renewed them with purpose. Many lead mentorship programs that support the girls that are in our programs, their spiritual, emotional, and social development at our centers. So it's a wonderful way for them to live with purpose and giving back. And lastly, in 2023, we made tremendous strides in helping our partners achieve food security, which is a pivotal part of our economic development agriculture expansion. Currently we import food to all of our centers, typically from Kenya, by truck, which is dangerous and expensive. But over the last 3 years, we've been building a thriving partnership with an organization called Rise Against Hunger at 2 of our centers, primarily focused at Hope for South Sudan, which is, as you note here, the largest farm that we have. In 2020, when that partnership began, we grew from 2020 to 2023, we grew the farm production from 20 acres to 127 acres in just 3 years. And last year was the first time at Hope for South Sudan that 75% of all consumed food was generated on their farm. This is a huge success for us, and we hope that we will gain 100% in the next 2 years. Over the past 5 years, you've helped us uplift thousands of children. In 2023, we maintained a 92% average retention rate across all locations, with an average dropout of 17.6 years. So kids are staying in our program until they're young adults, which is a big success, because they've been equipped to lead lives. Even if they don't have a high school degree, they have been invested in. And I think this is really critical. It's very hard. There's a lot of pressure, especially with not a lot of education opportunities for the majority, that they're literate, that they've been invested in, that they've experienced compassion and Christ's love. Where they journey to next, even when they don't graduate, is building that resiliency, which Carey will talk about in just a moment. So in high-risk areas, this is an incredible accomplishment from our local partners for providing academic excellence and a safe place for children to thrive. Due to the trauma the kids in our program have experienced and the instability in their area, our dropout rate is low considering all the barriers the children face. And in 2023, we also completed our initial ACEs survey, which Carey is going to start sharing about in just a moment. But due to the young ages, she'll explain more about what ACEs mean and how ACEs are collected. But as a caveat for how we did our program, the kids in our program are very young, and there's not therapists on site. Therapy is not there's very few therapists in Sudan and South Sudan, despite how much trauma there is. So we are very careful with how we collect data, and we use a storytelling model. So children self-reported anything they wanted to without prompting about what their life is like and where they came from. And so the data we ascertained from that information, that storytelling model, there were no pressure or prompts to disclose anything about the harm they may have experienced. Yet even still, the ACEs that we learned are significant. And we know that there is a much higher count of ACEs experienced by the children within our programs that have not been indicated in our data. And the most common ACEs include physical and emotional neglect. And I've invited Carey to share more about the history and science and the importance of positive and adverse childhood experiences. Monitoring PACEs and your support in growing opportunities for resiliency is critical for our programs. And I'm excited to have Carey share more specifically about her years of research and experience. So Carey, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm going to read something to y'all first, just because I love this so much. And I will include it in the slides that y'all can receive as a permanent display file. But it's a quote from a social worker, and I often start talks with this. Each of us must come to care about everyone else's children. We must recognize that the welfare of our children and grandchildren is intimately linked to the welfare of all other people's children. After all, when one of our children needs life-saving surgery, someone else's child is threatened. Someone else's child will perform it. If one of our children is threatened or harmed by violence, someone else's child will be responsible for the violent act. The good life for our own children can be secured only if a good life is also secured for all other people's children. And this is a quote from Lillian Katz, who is a social worker who I believe is still alive and has been a social worker for many years. So if you'll advance the slide, please, Ashton, that'd be great. So we're going to talk a little bit about how understanding and raising awareness about PACE's science can help prevent and heal trauma. And what we're talking about is children who have been through extreme trauma with food insecurity and losing their parents and knowing so much violence is all around. But I look at those precious innocent babies and I think they are all ours to need to care about. And so you can advance to the next slide, please. So what is PACE's science? It is there are 5 parts to it, and it's the research about the lifelong impact of both positive and adverse childhood experiences and how the two work together. There are some people who have a lot of adverse childhood experiences and not many positive childhood experiences. And for them, sometimes life is very hard. There are people who have a lot of adverse childhood experiences, but have also had a lot of positive childhood experiences. And those positive childhood experiences have buffered them from some of the results that can come from having a lot of adverse childhood experiences. So how they work together in our lives, as well as our families and our organizations and the systems in which we live in our community. So the 5 parts of PACE's science, and PACE's again stands for positive and adverse childhood experiences. It's the epidemiology, the ACE study that was completed in 1998, the impact of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, on the brain, so the brain science, the impact of ACEs on the body, so the biology of ACEs. And then there's the epigenetics, which is very important because it's trauma over time, over generations, and what that has done to people and what it does do to people, and how important it is for us to arrest this because we're seeing the impact of this every day in what we see is happening with Black mothers and Black child and maternal health. And then resilience. This is the best part, is that the brain is plastic, the body wants to heal, and resilience is possible. And I am living proof of that. So next slide, please, Ashton. So the epidemiology, the Kaiser CDC Permanente, Kaiser Permanente CDC ACE study and subsequent studies show that people who have ACEs, the more you have, the greater the impact of the ACEs. That the 10 original ACEs included living with an alcoholic parent, having sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse, physical neglect, emotional neglect, the inside the home traumas of, as I said, living with an alcoholic parent, living in domestic violence, losing a parent to death or divorce, having a family member who is incarcerated. And that pretty much tells us what those are. But then there are ones that are out in the community and even historical ones that we'll look at in a minute. But the main part about this that's so interesting is that we learned from the ACEs study, and it said that when one of the docs who was doing the study opened the results and looked at the results, that he just sat there and wept because they had surveyed more than 17,000 Kaiser Permanente patients in San Diego. So they were mostly white, they were mostly middle class, college educated. Most of them had good jobs because they had to be Kaiser Permanente patients. But what they found was that about 64% of, well, at that time, it was a little less. It was about 61%. had at least one ACE, and about 12% had 4 ACEs. And that's important because now, years later, we see that that number of 4 ACEs uh, in the general population has increased to about 17.3%. So, and it keeps going up. So, next slide, please. So the study shared that what happens is we see an increase in physical abuse by the people who have experienced ACEs. People who experience ACEs oftentimes become victims and they become perpetrators, either or, and rescuers. So that there is also an increased likelihood of not having secure relationships. There's a lot of unemployment. There's a lot of risky behavior. But we see that the big challenges that come, especially when you get to 4 or more of these adverse childhood experiences, in double the rates of cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and we'll go into that a little bit more deeply. But you can see in this infographic that we did at PACES Connection that you've got the the ACEs that happen in the home are what's in the branches of the tree. Down below the roots of the tree. Okay, so we're looking there at the community violence, at the racism, at the inequity, at the unemployment, at the inability to break out of poverty, and then how that grows up into the tree. And we can see before payday, before people get their checks, that the ACEs increased in the tree, the physical abuse, the emotional abuse, the neglect, the domestic violence. All of that increases because people are so stressed. And then the other thing that's happening now, as you can see in this slide, we have environmental ACEs. And this is a huge factor for those of us in the Southeast where, we've got Tornado Alley, and I'm in North Carolina where there have been hurricanes, but we've got the climate crisis. We've got people who are suffering with environmental ACEs, rather, environmental ACEs, and with racial ACEs, which is really a big thing that people from one zip code to another, life variance can be 10 years because the little kid who is Black and living, or of color, who is living next to a chemical plant and is breathing bad air and can't get good food or medical care or whatever, 10 years cut life expectancy because of those kind of factors. So you can go to the next slide, please. So what happens when children are very stressed is that their brains are affected. And when we're very stressed, and I'll go into this just a little bit more in a minute, but our bodies gin up a lot of cortisol and a lot of adrenaline. And these are kind of like kerosene on a fire, and they inflame our bodies. And as you can see in this slide, what a healthy brain looks like in a child, and then a brain with toxic stress. And where those holes are is the prefrontal cortex of the brain. And that's where the thinking and the planning, the executive function, that's where all that happens. And when we're stressed with toxic stress, we can't access that part of our brains. And so that's why I say one ACE leads to another ACE, to another ACE, and to another ACE. Next slide, please. And so we talk about stress as being positive stress, like this is positive stress to be giving this little talk right now. I'm enjoying it. It's fun. It was a little, getting it all put together. Tolerable stress is, it's serious. It's temporary stress. We're in school. We've got a lot of finals. We've got a big deadline at work. It's just, honest. But then toxic stress, the prolonged activation of stress, of our stress response system, where the cortisol and the adrenaline are being pumped out constantly. Next slide, please. And where this is really majorly important is the first 60 days of life. Um, Oprah Winfrey and Bruce Perry, Dr. Bruce Perry, wrote a wonderful book that I love, and I put it into the resources. It's called What Happened to You. And in this book, What Happened to You, he talked about new research that had just come out in 2018, work that he had done with a bunch of psych nurses, and they were looking to pinpoint when were children most vulnerable from the standpoint of healthy brain development. The first 60 days of life, this is really critical. If a baby has a great first 60 days of life where they are nurtured consistently, they don't go hungry, they get picked up when they cry, they're loved on, there's not toxic intensity in the house of domestic violence or drug abuse or whatever, for that first 60 days, even if that child has a horrible next 12 years of his or her life, because of all the connections, the synapses that are being formed in the brain at that time, that baby is going to have a better life outcome than the baby who has a really horrible first 60 days where there's violence and loud noises, and he or she can't count on a loving adult to come and pick them up and change their diaper and feed them. Even if that child has a great next 12 years, he or she will probably have a worse life outcome than the baby who had the good first 60 days. So that's how mission critical it is that we in this country and all over the world protect mothers and new fathers and give them the space and the time to have that secure attachment that leads to healthy brain development, so that kids get programmed for curiosity and peace and relationship as opposed to violence and chaos and isolation. And if you want to get this little book, which I absolutely love, that's the link to it right there. Next slide, please. So the consequences to our health. So you get the brain consequences, and it goes all the way through. I mean, 0 to 3, there's an organization called 0 to 3 because they talk about how important it is, those first 3 years. 0 to 5, people talk about that as well. The, the, the sooner we can get a child into a safe, stable, nurturing relationship and home and environment, the better. Because what happens if they don't, um, over the lifespan, what we'll see is toxic stress attacks every organ in the body. It attacks the brain, it attacks the heart. You'll see in people who have a higher ACE score, a lot of chronic back pain, a lot of gastrointestinal issues, a lot of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, a lot of mental health challenges. And I think that that's really what we're facing in the United States right now, is just layer upon layer upon layer of adverse childhood experiences. And then I call it the damdemic, pardon me, but the pandemic hit, and it really knocked it over kilter. And I really am concerned about what happens to the children who were born and were very young in this time. Next slide, please. So what we find is people who have 3 or more ACEs, 3 ACEs, are 3 times more likely to commit suicide and 3 times more likely to use illicit drugs. But remember when I said that 4 is a big number for ACEs? So if you have an alcoholic father and there's domestic violence, and there is also some emotional neglect and some physical abuse, that's 4 ACEs. That person is 12 times more likely to have attempted suicide, 7 times more likely to become an alcoholic. A girl who grows up with an alcoholic father is 4 times more likely to become an alcoholic herself. They have 10 times more likelihood of using illicit drugs, 460 times more likely to suffer from depression. I mean, we're just layering these up and layering them up and layering them up, because it's not just the original 10 ACEs, it's the neighborhood violence, It is the poverty. It is the racism. It's the community stress. It is the feeling trapped by systemic oppression and systemic racism that is just a thousand cuts over and over and over again. Next slide, please. And the health consequences are enormous. Um, we probably, I see so many big numbers thrown around, so I'm just going to be straight up honest about that. That this was a slide that came out in 2019 that a 10% reduction in adverse childhood experiences could result in total annual savings of $56 billion in the United States. That's mind boggling to me because I've heard it said that $25 billion would help us get all the kids out of poverty, for crying out loud. So the idea of prevention is so dear to my heart, and that what Audrey is and what you all are doing by lifting up vulnerable, you're preventing this. It's so incredibly important because prevention's where it's at. I mean, healing is wonderful as well, but wow, the money that we spend on prevention, we get so much greater return on. Next slide, please. Because now, well, I'll give you another fact in just a few minutes. But when we look at the historical and generational trauma, which gets us into the epigenetics, which gets us into the fact that Black women are much more likely to die of heart disease, of heart attack, of stroke, of hypertension, of kidney failure, because it's just generation after generation after generation of this stress. And we learned this after the Holocaust, when research was done on the children of people who were imprisoned, and their children had these fears built into them. There have been so many different studies on fruit flies and rats, but all across the board, what the parents are afraid of, the children somehow it is passed on. So when we look at this slide, which I absolutely love this illustration done by the North Carolina Partnership for Children, it includes the atrocious cultural experiences that people in the Sudan are living with generation after generation after generation. And the atrocious cultural experiences are the groundwater that feed the roots, that feed the tree, where the household ACEs happen. And then the fact that one person thinks that they have a right to dominate another person leads us to where we are with environmental climate trauma, that one person thinks it's okay to burn fossil fuels and create global warming. So again and again and again, you see how ACEs science just keeps affecting every part of our lives. Next slide, please. And I'll go real quickly, but the causes of intergenerational trauma: domestic violence, war, natural disasters, racism, abuse, oppression, genocide, enslavement. What people in the Sudan are going through every day with the heat, with the needing food, but what you guys are doing. And next slide, please, takes us to the wonderful part of our humanity, that God made us so wonderfully, that our brains are plastic and that we have neuroplasticity. And what that means is we can change. We can take some of these synapses, these neural networks that have been programmed for trauma, and to be afraid and to jump and to have great fear. But we can also put in some positive childhood experiences that are absolutely buffering protective factors. And the thing that I love about these positive childhood experiences, that 4 of them happen in community. So we can help people enjoy participating in community traditions and having 2 non-parent adults who actually really, really care about them, and feeling supported by friends, and having a sense of belonging in high school. We can teach people how to do that. And that is so important because, and you can go to the next slide, please, Ashley. If people have those positive childhood experiences, they're less likely to have mental health challenges as adults. And that's why we need to make this happen, because when people have positive childhood experiences, we can actually, if you look at this teeter totter, or this you can see that there's a fulcrum in there, the red triangle, that by loading the positive childhood experiences, we can move the fulcrum so that positive childhood experiences can outweigh the negative childhood experiences. So the children in Lift Up the Vulnerable, who are loved by people, who are being greeted, who are getting food consistently, who are being educated. These are positive childhood experiences for them to see the change that's happening around them, just as they are positive childhood experiences for people all over the world. Next slide, please. So, when we balance the ACEs and the PCEs, you can move the fulcrum. And so that as a person heals, their tolerance for adversity increases, and that means they become more resilient. And that's what we're looking to do, is to help people. First of all, let's prevent the ACEs so we don't have to worry about resilience, but because we know it's going to happen, let's try to help people be as resilient as we possibly can. So let's see where I am on time. Let's Oh gosh, I'm done. I'm so sorry. But know this, that the slides, we will have a PDF of this, and you can download the PDF and look through it, and also the video will be there. So please pardon me that I went a little too long. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Carey. This is really rich, and I wish we had an hour to dive deeper, and that still would just not be enough time. But thank you for this wonderful report and overview of how ACEs affect our lives. And we'll share these slides with everyone tonight. So there's a lot of great resources that Carey has provided if you want to dive deeper into this conversation. And of course, we'll also have time for questions. So I'm going to share some looking ahead highlights for 2024. But as I do that, if you want to add any questions for Carey into the chat, we'll be pivoting there in just a moment. We have really big plans for this year. We take a visionary approach that will enable that holistic resiliency building that Carey mentioned, long-term development of the children in our network by creating that safe space for kids to thrive. We want to progress from meeting the urgent near-term needs of our children toward empowering the whole child to not only reach their full potential in health and vitality, but also in school, church, and community. And the community development is a critical component of our work. Our kids live in community with each other, with loving adults who care for them. And I really appreciate you speaking to how much community really impacts lives and a child's growth and strengthening. So thanks for naming that very specifically. Your contributions are really critical, of course, to preventing trafficking and providing essential infrastructure that keep kids safe. This year, we want to expand our farming at all locations. Our goal for food security, which is really critical and really a beautiful part of our program, it's evolving as we engage more and more local women who serve as field and farm school participants, that they're engaging their kids and in the benefits, not in the work, but in the benefits of having food security at home and having livelihood. So it's a community development initiative that also directly benefits the kids in our program. We also want to expand infrastructure in the coming years, and this year with developing and building high school and some elementary school classes in Sudan. If the climate of that community continues to be safe, we will do that. We have renovations of existing buildings, and we hope to drill a new well this year at Hope for South Sudan. We also want to deepen our holistic and community-centered economic empowerment programs, involving skills training and having a few teams that go to work specifically with medical and pastors that will also do outreach in the wider villages. So they'll be the hands and feet that help identify human trafficking, help raise awareness about it, and be members that are reaching out and doing more good in their community. So we hope to expand our trafficking prevention model through them. And lastly, we have the capacity to protect in the space in our schools to protect and educate about 120 up to 121 new children through our program. So we're in the process of recruiting right now and have identified all of the kids, 51 children affected by war in Sudan that are now living safely with us. So we're really appreciative of the partnership that makes that possible, that new kids that really need critical care can be a part of our programs. So how can you help prevent human trafficking? You can share with others. One of the best ways that we invite people to participate is help getting the word out about our work. Sharing our website, sharing brochures, which we would be happy to send to you freely, getting the word out that about the studies that Carey has shared and how ACEs and PACEs and preventing trafficking is possible. We've seen it. We've seen the transformation that takes place in the lives of the kids in our programs. One way to do that is through a program called Love Strong. And in a moment, I'll put a link to Love Strong in the chat so that you can see how a fitness fundraiser that we are doing annually. It will launch June 1st through Labor Day. And it's a focus on strengthening the kids in war-torn nations as you set personal goals to increase your own physical health. So it really is a good model for even the PACES study, that why integrating positive experiences in our own healing journey is also benefiting the kids in their healing journey. It's a very exciting, fun, simple way to raise awareness and raise funds and help save lives in Sudan and South Sudan. Another ways by joining our monthly giving program, which I'll also share more about. Monthly giving is a critical component of helping sustain our work. And it's a simple way to address the root causes of exploitation in war-torn countries. And lastly, to pray. As an ecumenical organization, we want to connect with communities of faith and mobilize faith leaders and their communities with meaningful ways to prevent trafficking. So if you are a member of a church, some of you are members that are specifically here to share more with your missions committee, but also if you want to engage your church that has not been engaged yet with our work, please feel free to reach out to me or Sasha Nicole, who's also on this call. She's our advancement officer. And we want to be supportive to you as you help us raise awareness in larger communities and community groups. There are 3 ways that you can pray, especially for the people of Sudan. The needs there are just so immense. And please be praying for the people of Sudan as the governments seek solutions in this very complicated global atrocity. And for the children who have nowhere to go for help, and the new students that we'll be able to protect and empower this year. Lastly, for the leaders in Sudan, South Sudan, and Kenya, as they develop programs that impact and support communities. And I see that questions are coming in, and I hope that they continue to. I want to end with a prayer, but then for anyone that can stay on for the final Q&A time for questions for me or for Carey, please continue to add some questions. But if you'll join me in hearing this prayer and participating with me. Oh God, we didn't see them, but you did. The hundreds and thousands of human beings trafficked each year to join the millions who are trapped in modern-day slavery. Under terrible conditions, they work in factories, they plow fields, harvest crops, work quarries, fill brothels, clean homes, and haul water. Many are children with tiny fingers for weaving rugs and small shoulders for bearing rifles. Their labor is forced, their bodies beaten, their faces hidden from those who didn't really want to see them. But you see them all, God of the poor. You hear their cry and you answer by opening our eyes and breaking our hearts and loosening our tongues to insist no more. Thank you for being a part of this mission and this ministry and the work that we're doing. in hard to reach places. It's transforming lives. Thank you.